The stage lights inside the studio were already burning white when Jimmy Kimmel settled behind his desk, shuffled his notes once, and looked straight into the camera with the expression of a man who had seen something extraordinary and could not wait to share it. He didn't need to set it up. The clip did the work. On the monitor behind him, Donald Trump stood at a podium in Indiana, Pennsylvania. A political rally, the kind where voters showed up hoping to hear about the border or the economy, or at least something connected to the mechanics of governing a nation. Instead, what they got was a review, a theatrical criticism, a former president of the United States at a microphone in front of thousands of people dissecting Jimmy Kimmel's performance as host of the Academy Awards. Trump leaned into the podium the way a man leans into something he's been rehearsing. Has there ever been a worse host than Jimmy Kimmel at the Oscars? He let that sit. Then, his opening was the work of a less-than-average person trying too hard to be something he is not and never can be. And then, as a suggestion, he proposed replacing Kimmel with what he called another washed-up but cheap ABC talent. And here he paused for effect. George Stephanopoulos. The crowd in Indiana laughed. Some cheered. This was a political rally. 6 months after the Oscars. Back in the studio, Kimmel watched it finish. He turned back to his audience. He didn't shout. He didn't gesture. He just waited for the laughter to crest, and then, with the timing of a man who had been doing this for 20 years, he said it. Okay, see if you can guess which former president just posted that on Truth Social. Anyone? The audience howled before he finished the sentence. He nodded along, hands spread, generous with the credit. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you for watching. A beat. I'm surprised you're still... Isn't it past your jail time? No lecture followed, no outrage, no editorial. Just a man who had noticed that the joke was already written, had already been delivered by someone else, and all he had to do was read it back to the room. The audience leaned in and laughed because they recognized it. That was the beginning. While Trump was replaying his Oscars grievances at campaign stops, something else was happening in a Manhattan courtroom that deserved considerably more airtime than it was getting. A $250 million civil fraud case against the Trump family business. And Donald Trump Jr. was on the stand. His defense, delivered under oath with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed it, went roughly like this. He was not supposed to personally verify financial statements because the family paid one of the largest accounting firms in the world to do exactly that. Why, he argued, should he be expected to know more than the professionals they hired? Kimmel read this to his audience the next night. He didn't add analysis. He didn't need to. He just read it. Then he moved to the next item from the same testimony. Don Jr. had offered, unprompted, an assessment of his father's legacy in the hospitality industry. The specific legacy, he said his father was, in his own words, the father of the hotel gym. He meant this seriously. He was proud of this. He said that while maybe somebody somewhere had put gym equipment in a building at some point, nobody had done it at the scale of his father. Kimmel looked at the audience. The audience looked back at Kimmel. He is saying, Kimmel said carefully, that his father, the father of the hotel gym, is a guy who has never stepped inside one. The room fell apart. Not from cruelty, from the recognition. The gap between the claim and the observable reality was so cleanly visible that all Kimmel had to do was describe it and stand back. This was the method. Not rage, not argument, just illumination. Don Jr. watched the monologue. He responded immediately, the way a man responds when something has landed squarely, and the only available option is noise. He posted a video rebuttal. He captioned it about Hollywood elites. He was furious in the specific way of someone who wants you to believe the joke didn't land, while simultaneously proving that it did. 3 hours later, something churned up from the online machinery that surrounds this family, the way weather surrounds a mountain. A story spread. Don Jr. had called the police on Jimmy Kimmel. There was a thumbnail. There was a fake siren graphic. There was the word breaking in capital letters applied to something that had not, in any documented sense, occurred. There was no precinct. There was no report number. There was no crime, no call, no complaint. Just the visual language of urgency dressed over the absence of anything. Kimmel addressed it the next night, the way a man addresses a minor inconvenience he finds mildly entertaining. He noted that it hadn't happened. He noted the specific absence of any of the things that would need to exist for the story to be real. Then he moved directly back to the trial, because the trial was still happening and the trial was real. Here is the thing Kimmel had figured out, and here is why the pattern kept going in only one direction. The family needed to be victims. That was not a byproduct of the dynamic. It was the product itself. Every monologue clip, every courtroom quote, every Oscars callback that bounced around online got repackaged inside the family's media operation as evidence of persecution. The system is rigged. The comedians are agents of something larger. The laughter is an attack. The receipts are a conspiracy. Victimhood, assembled and sold on a daily basis, back to the people who had been waiting for exactly that story. What Kimmel offered in response was structurally different, and that difference was the whole thing. He listed what happened. He read the quotes back. He let the audience do the recognizing themselves. No fury, no call to action, no splitting of screens to debate someone who had already handed him the material. He just held up the thing that existed and stayed quiet long enough for the room to see it. Then came the part where Trump couldn't let the Oscars go. He posted about it again. He got the quote wrong again. He brought up Kimmel's wife, not once but several times at several rallies, more times in a single campaign year than he had mentioned his own wife in the same span. He called Kimmel one of the dumbest human beings alive. Kimmel walked out to his desk, looked into the camera, and noted this. "I know your cognitive abilities are declining faster than the price of Truth Social stock," he said. "So if it helps, I'm happy to send you one of the many products commemorating what I actually said to you that night at the Academy Awards, so you never forget it again." Behind him, the screen filled with merchandise. T-shirts, coffee mugs, multiple coffee mugs, a quantity of coffee mugs that constituted, by any reasonable measure, a statement. The audience howled, not because they were angry, because Kimmel had just taken Trump's exact playbook. Brand everything, monetize the conflict, sell the friction back to the crowd, and turned it 45 degrees. The former president had handed him a feud, and Kimmel had put it on a mug. That was the symmetry. That was why it landed. Here is what the outrage machine never learns, and keeps being surprised to discover over and over at great cost. Every time Don Jr. fired off a furious rebuttal, he sent several million people back to the original joke to understand what he was so furious about. Every time Trump mentioned the Oscars at another rally, months later, then more months later, he handed Kimmel another clip, another timestamp, another demonstration that this particular wound had not healed and would not be allowed to. Every time the machine produced a fake breaking story about sirens and police calls, the audience leaned slightly closer to the calm person in the studio, reading the actual sequence of events in chronological order. The louder the response, the more precisely it confirmed the aim of the original. This is the physics of the dynamic, and it does not change regardless of how loud the response gets. The family had a single available product, and it was volume. In a landscape that had rewarded escalation for so long that escalation had become the only language some people knew how to speak, the man with the desk and the receipts just kept his voice level, kept the quotes accurate. Let the material arrive on its own schedule, which it did, reliably, every week. The clips spread not because the audience was enraged by them. They spread because the audience was relieved by them. Because someone had finally found language for the thing they had been watching and hadn't quite been able to name. Someone was describing the show clearly, without performing outrage about it, without asking the audience to feel a particular way about it. Just, here is what was said. Here is what followed. Here is what that means when you hold it still and look at it. Receipts, organized. Voice, steady. The family delivering the material on schedule. Subscribe if you believe clarity cuts deeper than noise. Turn on notifications if you think a well-kept receipt outlasts a rally.